Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I am State Senator Andrew Gounardes, the chairman of the Senate Committee on Budget and Revenue. And today we're here with some of my colleagues and a coalition of folks to respond to what is going to be happening or what is happening right now at the federal level in terms of our budget and our tax code, and also what we could be doing here in New York to keep advancing the conversation that needs to be had about how we can actually make life more affordable for New Yorkers. Three out of the top 10 cities in the country for child poverty are right here in New York. That is a fact and a statistic that no one should be proud of. And so we have a lot of work to do to make sure that all New Yorkers are able to live healthy, productive, wholesome lives without having to struggle about how they're going to put food on the table, how they're going to be able to pay their rent, how they're going to pay for a growing utility bill, and how they're going to be able to provide for their families. Right now, our tax code here in New York is a mess of carve-outs and loopholes and benefits that really only help the wealthy and the well-connected, depriving us of crucial state funding for programs that help everybody else. In some ways, the New York code mirrors the federal code in that way. At the start of this legislative session, I put out a report detailing roughly $3 billion in questionable, flawed, and downright ridiculous state tax expenditures on everything from gold bar exemptions to private jets to subsidizing your gambling losses. And it's time to put an end to that. That's why today we're announcing a package of bills to help close these loopholes and restructure our tax code so that it serves all New Yorkers. Just a couple of quick highlights before I turn things over to my colleagues here. One of the proposals is to limit the net operating loss carrybacks that businesses can claim on their corporate franchise taxes from 3 years to 1 year, and their carry forwards from 20 years down to 5 years. This is basically a way that very wealthy corporations can spread out their very minimal tax liability across multiple years without having to pay their fair share. It's interesting to note that the federal government actually has, in some cases, a more restrictive treatment of corporate taxes than our own state tax code here in New York. And in other measures, it is much more generous. We think that corporations should be paying their fair share, and we want to tighten their ability to carry back or carry forward their losses. We want to eliminate the ridiculous sales tax exemption for gold bars and other precious metal bullion. Who's buying gold bars? Certainly not working class New Yorkers, certainly not people who are struggling to pay the rent, certainly not people who are wondering how they're going to afford childcare, how they're going to afford after school. This is a tax exemption that costs the state hundreds of millions of dollars a year in foregone revenue, and we can put that revenue to much better use to help lift the boats of all New Yorkers. Sales tax on tickets that cost more than $1,000. There are some Broadway shows where tickets are selling for $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 a pop. Broadway shows, by the way, that benefit from the Broadway tax credit that we just expanded in this year's budget. Working New Yorkers, working class New Yorkers, middle class families, they can't afford $2,000, $3,000 for a ticket to go to a Broadway show or a live entertainment event like that. And so people that can afford that, for whom it's just like nothing special to have to shell out that money for, they should be paying for the privilege to spend that kind of money to be able to go to live entertainment events. We wanted to talk about eliminating the itemized deduction for gambling losses. Now, only 10% of filers in the state of New York are itemizing their deduction, which means that this deduction is subsidizing wealthy individuals who gamble lots of money and lose lots of money, and they're able to write off those losses on their state taxes. This makes no sense. We should not be subsidizing the gambling addictions of the ultra wealthy here in New York. We want to impose a full sales tax on the sale of racehorses purchased through claiming races. Why should racehorses be exempt when you have to go buy school supplies every August and you have to pay full tax on your school supplies, but someone buying a racehorse does not have to pay comparable sales tax? It does not make sense, and that can bring in tens of millions of dollars in much needed revenue. We want to restructure the tax deduction for college tuition and really limit it to help families who need that help the most. There's no reason why people who are earning more than $1 million should be able to claim the tax deduction for their college tuition. It just subsidizes their college payments, and they are the ones that can afford it the most, whereas working class and middle class families are struggling to be able to decide whether they can even afford college in the first place. We can better target that deduction to help invest in college access and affordability for the broad swath of New Yorkers for whom this is a priority. One of my colleagues has talked about for years the need to reinstate the sales tax on private jets. Again, why? If you have to pay sales tax on your colored pencils and your school bags and your school supplies, why should someone buying a private jet be exempt from sales tax? But you, a regular New Yorker, has to pay sales tax on everything. Make it make sense because it simply does not. And similarly, we want to include or extend the sales tax on private yachts. Same case to be made. If you're buying a private boat, you are not the 1 in 4 New Yorkers, one of the 1 in 4 New Yorkers who are struggling right now. You are the less than 1 in 10 New Yorkers who can even afford a private boat in the first place, and you need to be paying your fair share for that. These simple changes to New York's tax laws would provide resources and programs to fund affordable housing developments, to help lift children out of poverty and offer universal childcare, to help make sure that we can invest in our public transit system to make it faster and more reliable, to actually support small businesses who are going to be facing a crush from the Trump tariffs, and to actually ensure real public safety. And fundamentally, this is about basic fairness. And I think that in this moment in time, when we can see the writing on the wall with what the federal government wants to do with the Trump tax scam that is advancing through Congress right now, this is the time to be talking about these things. This is the time to be working on how we can actually protect New Yorkers, hold the line, and make sure that we are not complicit in a tax code and a tax system that benefits the very few at the expense of the very many. So this is a call to action for all of us, and I'm grateful to have my colleagues here joining me in this fight and in this push. And so next, I want to turn it over for a few words. My colleague in the State Assembly, Assemblymember Tony Simone.
Good morning, everyone. I want to thank State Senator Andrew Gounardes and State Senator Brett Holman Siegel and my colleague, the great Assemblymember Mickey Solages, for being leaders on this. Look, at a time when we have an onslaught from the fascists and oligarchs who have stormed the castle in D.C. and not only out there for their well-to-do friends, I've often argued for my district, I represent the 75th district, the west side of Manhattan. It shouldn't be a playground just for the rich and the well-to-do. Our party and progressives must deliver for the middle class. For too long, it seems like we've abandoned many in the middle class. And the only way we're ever going to not only win elections, but have a fair budget is to have everyone pay their fair share. As Senator Gounardes had just said, we just came out of a budget, a late budget. And while there were many positive things in the budget, some of us are still fighting for more money for mental health, the mental health care crisis, to ensure that our admission laws are treated fairly and are kept affordable, that we want to make sure we build workforce housing for the middle class. And, there's always a limit in our budget. And we know that we'll probably have to come back in the near future as, the oligarchs in D.C. are setting out more tax cuts for their friends and coming after our healthcare and Medicaid. That's why I'm glad to be part of this tax package. Some of the specifics is, look, some of the loopholes that we've had only benefit the rich while the rest of us foot the bill. One example is New York lost more than $6 million by exempting purchases of racehorses for sales and compensating use tax. Without getting into the pros and cons of racehorsing, folks who can afford to buy these racehorses and flip them should be able to afford to pay a sales tax, since many of our middle class folks pay sales tax, as the senator said, on clothing and everyday items. In addition, we've had a loophole that exists that high price tickets for admission to not only racetrack events, but boxing, live circus, over $1,000 are not taxed. And it should also be another revenue source. So I don't want to hear excuses. Every year we hear excuses from some of our leaders and from the executive that we can't afford this, we can't afford that. and we have billions of dollars in reserves, we should be able to fund and have the second to none transportation system in the greatest city in the world. We should be able to fund even bigger middle class tax cuts. We should be able to build affordable housing and supportive housing to solve our public safety and mental health crisis in every district in the state. And you have to put your money where your mouth is and fund our workers who work in the trenches, helping those in crisis. We can't afford that by simply always having these loopholes for the well-to-do. We need to make sure they pay their fair share, and this tax package begins to do that.
Roads and infrastructure, child care, other public goods that have a greater return on investment and benefit our society. I look forward to seeing these loopholes being put in my loophole jar that I've had for many years here at some point in time. But the reality is, when you look at these in 2015, when they passed this yacht tax exemption, the New York Times did a massive front page spread on this and showed how ridiculous it was. And yet it moves forward regardless and was put into the budget after major outcry. You look at the fact that we're not taxing the sale of racehorses. One of the biggest sales of racehorses occurs at Fasig-Tipton, right here in Saratoga Springs, and it's owned by a Dubai holding company. I don't think we need to be providing them with sales tax exemptions on the thoroughbred racehorses they're buying to the tune of millions of dollars. So I applaud the senator and assembly member for their work on this, and think that it is of the utmost importance that we close these loopholes and do so now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Next, we're going to hear from Nathan Gusdorf from the Fiscal Policy Institute.
Thanks, all. So this legislative package targets what has really been a longstanding issue in New York State's governance, namely the proliferation of tax breaks that serve rich people and influential business interests. The state loses billions of dollars every year for no sound policy reason, because these moneyed interests are able to influence the legislative process to serve their interests at the expense of the rest of us. It drives up everybody else's taxes, and it lowers the quality of our public services. And we should be clear that this is an amount of money that is really consequential within any year's budgetary debate. In recent years, we've seen fights over $500 million for public school funding, $1 billion in proposed cuts by the executive branch to the state's home care program, and we're talking about a comparable amount of money in these tax breaks. So we just have to remember that it really adds up, and it translates into very consequential decisions for the most important public services that all New Yorkers rely on. And that's before you even get to the important initiatives that have been left out of the budget, because, for instance, the state has chosen to spend $100 million on corporate tax breaks rather than low-income housing support. These problems have been present for decades. They've been well covered by policy experts and the controller offices, and yet it's always very hard to make progress on them because of basically the influence of the lobbies that support these tax breaks. But this is a timely proposal because we all know that the state is now about to lose billions of dollars, maybe even up to $10 billion in federal money. And that's going to make health insurance unavailable or unaffordable for millions of people. It's going to undermine our affordable housing programs and our federal funding for public schools. They're currently attacking funding for the MTA. And it is simply untenable now to continue giving away billions of dollars each year when those are the fiscal risks that really are going to affect each and every single one of us. And let's bear in mind that the reason that they're cutting that federal funding is, again, to give tax cuts to the highest earners, the most profitable businesses, and among other things, to create a $30 million estate tax exemption. So I really applaud all these legislators for putting together a package that doesn't just target that set of problems, but is really well designed and technically thought out, and it targets some of the most egregious tax breaks that we have in our tax law. And I hope that we can get some of these passed.
Thank you, Nathan. Now we're going to hear from Carolyn Martinez-Class from Invest in Our New York.
Thank you so much, Senator, for having us on. Invest in Our New York. My name is Carolyn Martinez-Klaus. I'm the campaign manager for the Invest in Our New York campaign. And Invest in Our New York supports Senator Gounardes and his colleagues' efforts to close tax loopholes that benefit the ultra-wealthy while working-class families struggle with rising costs of living and the threat of potential federal funding cuts. This morning, the Ways and Means Committee advanced a federal proposal that cements tax breaks for ultra-rich people and will cut healthcare access for low-income New Yorkers. As working-class New Yorkers face an uncertain future under this federal administration, we must ensure our state tax code works for everyone, not just those at the very top. New York is facing potential federal funding cuts that could devastate essential services for working class families. It's likely that over 2 million people will lose access to Medicaid as a result of the federal budget here in New York. Millions who rely on SNAP are also under threat. And at the same time, wealthy New Yorkers and corporations continue to benefit from outdated tax breaks worth nearly $3 billion annually at the state level. And federal lawmakers are looking to deepen those tax breaks. And so New York must ensure that everyone pays their share, especially when our communities need it the most. Too many tax laws on the books create loopholes that benefit only the ultra wealthy and giant corporations. And it has been said already, but we're not talking about small dollars. We're talking about billions. Those are public dollars that could support childcare programs, public hospitals, and our public infrastructure. And the bills in this package represent a crucial step towards a more just economy here in New York. By closing those loopholes, we can generate billions to invest in our communities. And this isn't an effort to punish success. It's about ensuring that everyone contributes fairly to our state and to make success for everyone possible. So we stand with Senator Gounardes, the Assembly members, and appreciate their work in creating a tax system that works for everyone.
Thank you, Carolyn. Now we're going to turn things over to Michael Kink from the Strong Economy for All Coalition. Mike.
Thank you, Senator Gounardes, Ms. Solages, Mr. Simone. The Republicans in Washington are coming for us. The Medicaid cuts that were released this week would cut over $6 billion out of health care in New York and drive over 2 million people off of health insurance. Elected officials in Albany are going to need to respond to that. And we need to be taxing billionaires and millionaires and wealthy corporations, not subsidizing their yachts and jets and gold bars and gambling debts. We're going to see more cuts to public schools, to public transportation, and Albany lawmakers need to respond. The first response we can do right now is get rid of some of these ridiculous subsidies that have piled up over the years, often by politicians that are funded directly by those very same billionaires, millionaires, and wealthy corporations. The broad public outrage over the oligarchy spreads across all state capitals in Washington. The same time, most regular people support making those that have the most pay to subsidize and to invest in things that help regular people. We need a strong safety net. We need great public schools. We need excellent, affordable, and accessible health care. And those things need to be maintained in the state of New York. This package puts a $3 billion floor under the cuts that are coming from Washington. We should pass every bill, and we should pass them before the legislature leaves session this year. And the governor should sign these measures. They're the first of many things that New York is going to have to do to respond in a fiscal way to what the Trump administration and Republicans in Congress are doing. These are broadly popular, and we strongly support the passage in the Senate, the House, the Assembly, and signed by Governor Hochul. Thanks.
Thank you, Michael. And last but certainly not least, we have Jack Connors from the Permanent Citizens Advisory Committee to the MTA. Jack.
Hi, thank you. Good morning, Senator, and thank you for championing this package. Also, thank you to Assemblymember Sloan, Solages, Carol, and Senator Hoylman-Siegel. We're facing the looming threat of cuts from Washington, but we're also facing the prospect of a recession due to some of the economic uncertainty we've seen. If we learned one thing from the Great Recession, it's that we can't, austerity is not a valid path towards recovery. New Yorkers can't afford another lost decade, and MTA riders cannot afford another summer of hell like we saw in 2017, which was brought on by disinvestment. The idea that if we, potentially cutting transit in order to fund a sales tax exemption on gold bars, it's not just morally bankrupt, it's economic malpractice. When the MTA investment in the MTA and in transit supports jobs in every single Senate district, every congressional district, and almost every single assembly district across New York State. So again, that we thank the bill sponsors, and we hope to see this passed. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Appreciate that. And so just to sum up, before we kick it over for questions, we are at an inflection point where we see what the federal government is planning to do. We see that this Trump tax scam is going to devastate New Yorkers. We see that it's a giveaway for the ultra wealthy, and it's going to hurt us really, really hard. And so we have an obligation right now to start mounting our defense and to start preparing for the inevitable fallout from when this tax package passes through. And so this is the time that we should be discussing these things. This is the moment where we should be preparing and planning. And that this way, once that does go through, New Yorkers are not faced with significant cuts to the programs that they rely on the most later on this year, but that we are ready to step into the breach and fill that void as best we can. And also show that there's a different way of leading. There's a different way of using the tax code to create prosperity for all. And it's not what's happening down in DC, and it's certainly not with perpetuating some of these egregious tax giveaways that we have here right in New York.